Hello everyone, this is Erik, the Asian movie enthusiast, and this is my review of The Neighbors, a Korean dramatic thriller from 2012. What would you do if you suspected someone living in your building was a serial killer? A man kills his own neighbors, including a middle school girl, living in his building, and continues to stay there, even after committing the grisly crimes. All of the neighbors in the film, at some point, suspect him of some odd behavior, but are reluctant to act due to self-interest. They simply do not want to meddle without sufficient evidence, or they cling to their daily routines, or there's some other motivations at play here. But meanwhile, this criminal continues to kill. Now, one of the first things you'll appreciate about this movie is the cast. Now, we've got Kim Yun-jin from Shiri, Kim Sae-ron from The Man from Nowhere, Ma Dong-seok from Train to Busan, and a handful of other very talented actors. I mean, those first three names alone are enough to sell this movie. And they're all fantastic in the film. Now, we also have Chun Ho-jin in a supporting role. Some viewers may know him from some horror films or crime films from the 2000s, like The Guard Post or A Dirty Carnival. But I became a fan of his after watching Midnight Ballad for Ghost Theater. He's also great in The Neighbors, in a side role, and he has some pretty interesting plot turns. Now, our main villain is played by Kim Sung-kyung, not an immediately recognizable name, but he's been in a ton of stuff over the last decade, and you've seen him before. And I really liked his interpretation of the murderer here. So, yeah, I mean, the casting in this movie is just top-notch. Now, The Neighbors is more of kind of like a low-key thriller when compared to some other popular efforts from South Korea. You're not going to get like the adrenaline rush you would get from like a Midnight FM, like a real, thrilling type conflict like that. And you're not going to get the graphic violence of something like I Saw the Devil. The unique element in this film is that each neighbor notices like a slightly odd behavior from the bad guy, but they don't really communicate with each other very much. And, no one in this film knows that this guy is an actual killer early in the film, but each neighbor has like a little piece of the puzzle, but the community fails to put it all together. So that creates like this disconnecting series of like circumstantial data points, and it doesn't really gel into a red flag because the characters aren't putting it together. Each of them just has a little piece. And that results in a lot of, like, interesting character interaction. And actually quite a bit of, like, slow burn suspense. Because you're like, okay, if this character and this character are, like, talking, you know what I mean? And they're, if they actually discuss what they've observed regarding this one dude, they're going to start putting pieces together. They're going to be like, wait, there's something shady about this guy. Like, he did this one thing this one day. It was just kind of, like, a little weird. But I didn't really think much about it. Like, if somebody else is like, well, I saw him doing this, and then somebody else shows up like, hey, and then, the cops would be called eventually. But there's just not enough to put it all together. And I found it to be, like, really interesting. It's almost kind of like, I don't know if they were trying to make a commentary on kind of like neighbor dynamics and, maybe lack of communication and interaction between neighbors or sufficient amounts. I don't know, but I think there's a little bit of that element in this. And the script does a good job of executing this in a pretty realistic manner. Like, the writing mostly avoids a reliance on artificial coincidence, which can get bad in movies like this. It's actually pretty good here. And there's one instance, even in one obvious case of questionable character decision-making, I thought would have no possible explanation. They eventually explain it in a reasonable manner. So, like, at some point in the movie, I was like, come on, man. Like, there's no reason why this character would act like this. Like, this is ridiculous. It's just a huge artificial contrivance. And then later on, they provide an explanation. I'm just like, all right, I guess that makes sense. So the script writing in this is pretty good. It's also not your typical murder mystery. A lot of murder mysteries throw a lot of red herrings at you. Maybe this person's the killer. Maybe this person's the killer. This movie doesn't even bother. It doesn't even. They're just like, in the first 10 minutes of the movie, they're like, here's your killer. They just show him to you, and he kills somebody. And So you know who the killer is. It's the neighbors who don't know. So it's almost like you have more information than the characters do, which actually creates a pretty interesting experience when you're watching the film, because you want somebody to catch on to this guy. You really do, but it's like, nobody really suspects him enough to take action, right? So it's pretty cool. And I would actually say the villain in this movie is probably the main character of the movie. I mean, this is a very ensemble film. Obviously, you have your three leads who have, probably most of the screen time, but then you have a bunch of other characters. They have a lot of screen time. And then the villain has just as much screen time as just about anyone else. So we spend a lot of time with the guy. So if somebody were to tell me that actually the villain's the main character in this movie, I'd be like, yeah, he probably is, So that's another interesting dynamic. And the structure, I'd say the opening half hour, there were a few scenes that are a little confusing, especially in regard to, let's see here, what's her name here? Kim Yun-jin's character. A few confusing scenes with her, but that clears up after the opening half hour. Then you start to put the pieces together. You're like, oh, okay, I get what's going on here. So if you're a little confused early on, just stick with it, and it's very easy to follow after the opening half hour. So and also there's also another genre element that's sprinkled in at times that I was not expecting, but it works. So this movie, The Neighbors, I would say is a very high quality dramatic thriller, and I'd say it's a must watch for anyone who's interested in Korean film. It's one that made a bit of a pop when it was initially released, and then just nobody talks about it anymore. This is another really good hidden gem for you to check out. Now, the easiest way to watch it is on Region 3 DVD from a website like Yes Asia. But yeah, definitely one to seek out. And as always, I will see you next time.